My name is Scarlett Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that love was something you could earn, that if you worked hard enough, gave enough, and stayed loyal enough, people would eventually love you back. I thought that's what family was all about. Unconditional love, right? But life has a strange way of teaching you that not everyone who shares your blood deserves your heart. I had a stable job, a warm home, and a beautiful little family of my own, my husband, Daniel, and our 5-year-old daughter, Emma. We were doing well, not rich, but comfortable. Every week, I sent my parents $700. It wasn't a burden. It was my way of saying thank you, of staying connected, of showing them that I hadn't forgotten everything they'd done for me. I told myself it was my duty as their daughter, but deep down, I also wanted their approval, maybe even their affection, the kind they never quite gave freely when I was growing up. It had become a routine. Every Friday morning, I'd transfer the money. Sometimes my dad would text a quick "got it." Sometimes not even that. My mom never said thank you. I used to imagine they'd sit down for dinner and think of me, maybe even feel proud of the daughter who took care of them. But as months went by, I realized how silent those payments felt. They didn't bring us closer, they just filled a space where love should have been. I still called them every Sunday, checking in on their health, asking if they needed anything. Most of the time, they'd brush me off with short replies, "We're fine," or "We don't need anything." There was no warmth in their tone, no curiosity about my life or Emma's. Still, I convinced myself that maybe this was just their way of loving, quiet, practical, emotionless love. But sometimes at night, I'd lie awake wondering why they never visited, why my mom never asked to FaceTime with Emma, why my dad never sent a birthday card. They lived only 2 hours away, not far, but far enough to make excuses. "We're busy," they'd say. "Maybe next month." And every time I heard that, I'd swallow the disappointment and tell myself that next time would be different. I tried to fill the gap by overcompensating. I sent gifts on holidays, offered to pay for small repairs in their house, and even suggested they move closer to us so Emma could see them more often. They always had a reason to say no. Still, I kept paying. Because that's what good daughters do. They take care. The distance between my parents and me wasn't always about miles. It was something much deeper, quieter, and harder to describe. It was in the way my mom's voice always sounded distracted when I called, or how my dad never remembered simple things I told him about Emma or my life. It was the kind of emotional distance that seeps in slowly until one day you realize you're talking to strangers who just happen to share your last name. I used to think it was normal, that maybe all families drift a little as children grow up and start their own lives. But this felt different. There was a wall between us, invisible but solid, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't climb over it. Every Sunday, after breakfast, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, take a deep breath, and call them. I told myself it mattered to keep trying. The phone would ring, and sometimes they wouldn't pick up. When they did, my mom's first words were always, "Yes, Scarlett." Never, "Hi, honey," or "How are you?" Just that flat tone that made me feel like I was interrupting something important. I'd tell her about Emma starting kindergarten, or the new project I was managing at work, but the silence on the other end felt heavy. "That's nice," she'd say, or "Oh." No follow-up question, no warmth. My dad would take the phone for a few minutes, talk about his back pain or the weather, and then end with, "Well, I'll let you go." The calls rarely lasted more than 10 minutes. I remember once sending them a picture of Emma dressed as a fairy for her school play. She looked so beautiful, her cheeks glowing with excitement. I waited for a message back. "She's adorable," or even a simple heart emoji. Nothing came. I checked my phone over and over that night until Daniel, my husband, finally said softly, "Maybe they're just not good with showing emotions, Scarlett." I smiled, pretending to agree, but inside, it broke me a little more. Because I didn't want Emma to grow up feeling that kind of coldness from her grandparents. I wanted her to know what it felt like to be loved by family, not out of obligation, but because she was part of them. The hardest part was watching other families. When my friends talked about dropping their kids off at their parents' house for the weekend, or having big Sunday dinners, I smiled politely and said we were too far for that. But the truth was, I'd invited my parents countless times, and they always had excuses. "Your house is too noisy," my mom would say. "We like our peace." My dad would chime in, "You know how traffic is." 2 hours of traffic for the people they claim to love. Yet every Friday, they were perfectly willing to drive 3 hours to visit my uncle's family. I try not to take it personally, but it's hard not to when your child asks, "Mommy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa come to see me?" And you don't have an answer that doesn't hurt. Sometimes, I tell myself that maybe they were just tired, maybe getting older had made them different. But in my quietest moments, I knew the truth. The emotional distance had always been there. Even when I was a kid, I was the one reaching for affection, the one trying to earn smiles, approval, love. I thought growing up and being successful would finally make me enough for them. But I was wrong. The older I got, the clearer it became that love can't be forced, not even from your parents. Still, I kept reaching out, because I couldn't give up on them. A part of me believed that maybe one day something would change, that they'd call just to say they missed me, or ask to visit Emma. But as weeks turned into years, that hope began to fade. Every unanswered message, every cold conversation was a reminder that the bond one was fighting to keep alive had already withered. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning the love of people who were still alive. And yet, I kept loving them from a distance, because that's what my heart knew how to do. Emma's 6th birthday was supposed to be one of those days you never forget, the kind filled with laughter, family, and the kind of joy that stays in photographs forever. I had been planning it for weeks, maybe even months. I booked a small local cafe that had a cozy play area for kids, ordered her favorite unicorn cake, and spent 2 nights hand-making little pink and blue goodie bags for her friends. Every detail mattered, because I wanted her to feel loved, celebrated, and surrounded by people who cared. I even called my parents 2 weeks in advance, excited, almost childlike, when I told them the date and time. My mom's voice was emotionless as usual. "We'll see," she said. My dad added, "If we're not too busy." I swallowed my disappointment, forcing a smile into my tone. "It would mean a lot to Emma if you came." There was a pause. "That we'll try" played in my mind every day until the party. I told Emma that her grandparents were coming, and her little eyes lit up. "Really, Mommy? Grandma will bring me a present." I laughed and said, "Of course, sweetheart." She started drawing a card for them, a stick figure picture of her with Grandma and Grandpa holding balloons. I found her sitting on the floor, coloring it carefully, whispering, "They're going to love this." My heart twisted in my chest because I wanted that picture to come true so badly. I wanted my parents to show up, not just for Emma but for me, for the daughter who had spent years trying to bridge the distance. The morning of the party, the house was alive with laughter. Daniel was hanging streamers, I was icing cupcakes, and Emma was running around in her new dress, her curls bouncing with every step. Guests started arriving, neighbors, school friends, and a few close colleagues. The air smelled like sugar and vanilla, and the room buzzed with happiness. Every time the door opened, Emma's head snapped up, expecting her grandparents. I caught her glancing at the driveway a few times, waiting. I kept checking my phone, too, hoping for a message or a missed call. Nothing. As the hours passed, the truth started sinking in. They weren't coming. I tried to stay cheerful, clapping as Emma blew out her candles, singing along, hiding the tightness in my throat. But every time I looked at her smiling face, a wave of sadness washed over me. When she opened her gifts, she paused and asked softly, "Mommy, where's the one from Grandma and Grandpa?" I froze for a second, my heart breaking in slow motion. "Maybe they'll give it to you when they visit," I said with a shaky smile. She nodded, believing me, and went back to her toys. I had to turn away so she wouldn't see the tears forming in my eyes. After everyone left and the laughter faded, I sat alone in the quiet living room surrounded by torn wrapping paper and half-eaten cake. Daniel came over, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "They didn't even call, did they?" he asked softly. I shook my head. Not even a text. Nothing. It wasn't just about missing a birthday. It was about what that silence meant. It was the final confirmation of what I'd been afraid to admit for years, that my parents didn't want to be part of my child's life, or maybe even mine. That night, when Emma fell asleep clutching her new doll, I stood by her bedside watching her breathe peacefully. She deserved so much more than this kind of absence. I wanted to protect her from the same kind of pain I grew up with, that hollow feeling of waiting for love that never comes. For the first time, I felt anger burning beneath my sadness. I wasn't angry because they missed a party. I was angry because they missed her. They missed a chance to know this incredible, bright little soul who loved them even without knowing what love should look like in return. And deep down, I knew that something inside me was beginning to change, something that would lead me to make a decision I never thought I'd make. After the birthday party, something inside me felt heavy, not just sadness, but a deep, aching kind of disappointment that settled into my bones. I spent the night trying to convince myself that maybe my parents had forgotten the date, or that something had come up. Maybe they were sick, or maybe they thought the party was another day. I tried to give them every possible excuse because the truth was too painful to face. But as the weekend passed with no call, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone for what felt like forever. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed my parents' number. It rang twice before my dad answered. "Hello!" His voice was casual, like nothing was wrong. "Hi, Dad," I began, trying to sound calm. "I was just wondering, why didn't you come to Emma's birthday? She was really looking forward to seeing you." There was silence on the other end, the kind that makes your heart pound because you know what's coming won't be good. Then he said, in a tone so cold it made me flinch, "We didn't want to." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "You didn't want to?" I repeated softly. "No," he said flatly. "We didn't feel like going." I felt my throat tighten. "Dad, she's your granddaughter," I whispered. "She kept waiting for you. She made you a card." Another pause. Then, in a voice that was sharper, almost bitter, he said the words that would replay in my mind for days. "Your child means nothing to us." Everything inside me went still. My breath caught in my chest. I stared at the wall in front of me, unable to process what I'd just heard. It was as if time stopped. My dad's words echoed, louder and louder, until my ears rang. "Your child means nothing to us." My hands started shaking. I wanted to speak, to say something, to ask how he could say that about an innocent little girl who had done nothing but love them. But no words came. I could hear my mother in the background asking who was on the phone, and he just replied, "Scarlett," like it was a nuisance. I don't even remember how the call ended. Maybe he hung up. Maybe I did. All I know is that I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My vision blurred as tears welled up and spilled over. I covered my mouth, trying to stop the sob that broke out of me, but it was useless. It wasn't just pain. It was disbelief, betrayal, and heartbreak all tangled together. I had spent years giving, hoping for giving, and in return I got those 6 words. When Daniel came home that evening, he found me sitting in the same chair, still crying. I told him what my father had said, my voice trembling, so much it barely sounded like mine. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw anger in his eyes, but he stayed calm. "You don't deserve that, Scarlett," he said softly. "Neither does Emma." I nodded weakly, but inside I felt empty. How do you even begin to process something like that, when the people who gave you life look at your child and say she means nothing? That night, I went to Emma's room and watched her sleep. She was clutching her teddy bear, her little chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, peaceful and innocent. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering, "You mean everything to me, baby." My voice cracked. I realized then that I couldn't let my parents' words define her sense of love or mine. Something inside me shifted, a quiet strength I didn't know I had began to rise. I didn't yell at them, didn't call back, didn't seek an apology. I just went still, trembling, heartbroken but calm. And in that silence, I made a decision that would change everything. That night was long and heavy. I couldn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the faint ticking of the clock and the sound of my daughter's soft breathing down the hallway. My father's words kept echoing in my mind. "Your child means nothing to us." Each time I replayed it, the pain cut deeper. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask what kind of parent could say something so cruel. But beneath all that anger, there was something else, a hollow kind of exhaustion. I realized I was done trying to make them love me. I was done begging for the affection that should have been given freely. That was the night I made my silent decision. I didn't plan it out. I didn't make some grand announcement. I just knew, deep in my soul, that I couldn't keep letting these people hurt me, or worse, my child. The next morning, I woke up early, before Daniel and Emma. The house was quiet, filled with the soft orange glow of sunrise. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at my phone. There were no new messages, no calls, nothing from my parents. Not even a trace of regret. I scrolled through our old text messages, months of me checking in, asking how they were, sending money, offering help. The conversations were mostly one-sided, full of my words and their short, detached replies. I could see now what I hadn't wanted to see before. I had been trying to keep alive. With shaking hands, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer I had set up years ago. Every Friday, $700 had gone from my account to theirs without fail. I stared at the confirmation screen for a long time. My finger hovered over the cancel button, and for a brief second, guilt washed over me. I thought of all the times I had told myself that taking care of them was my responsibility, that being a good daughter meant never stopping, no matter how they treated me. But now I realized something profound. Being a good daughter didn't mean sacrificing my own peace. It didn't mean allowing myself to be disrespected in the name of love. So I pressed cancel. And for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't call them to explain, didn't send a message, didn't say goodbye. I just stopped. It was strange, how quiet everything felt after that. No guilt-driven texts, no anxious waiting for replies that would never come. The silence that used to terrify me now felt peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm. I spent that morning making pancakes with Emma. She laughed as she flipped one too early and splattered batter on the counter. Daniel teased her, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching them, realizing that this was my family. Not the people who shared my blood, but the ones who shared my love. That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Mommy, did Grandma and Grandpa forget about me?" My throat tightened, but I smiled gently and said, "No, sweetheart. They just don't know how special you are yet." She accepted that answer with the kind of innocence only a child can have and hugged me tight. When she drifted off to sleep, I sat beside her, tears falling silently onto her blanket. I wasn't crying out of sadness anymore. It was more like release. In my heart, I whispered to my younger self, the little girl who had always wanted her parents' approval, "You did enough. You gave enough. You loved enough." And for the first time, I believed it. I didn't cut them off out of revenge. I did it out of self-respect. There was no anger left in me, only clarity. I realized that sometimes, walking away isn't an act of hate. It's an act of love for yourself and for those who truly matter. That night, I promised myself that Emma would never grow up feeling unwanted or unloved. She would never have to beg for love the way I did, because I was done repeating the cycle. I was ready to break it. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was learning how to breathe again. At first, the silence was strange. No phone calls, no short texts, no reminders of sending money. My parents didn't reach out once, not to ask why I stopped the payments, not to check in, not to question my absence. That hurt at first. A small part of me had secretly hoped that cutting them off might make them realize what they'd lost, that they'd call and apologize or at least ask how Emma was doing. But nothing came. And the longer the silence lasted, the more I began to understand that it wasn't punishment, it was freedom. In that quiet space, something inside me began to heal. I started to notice small things I'd ignored before, like how light the mornings felt without that anxious weight in my chest, or how laughter came easier when I wasn't constantly worrying about pleasing people who never appreciated me. I found peace in the little moments, making breakfast with Emma, watching her giggle as she chased bubbles in the backyard, sitting on the porch with Daniel on Sunday evenings, sipping tea while the sky turned gold. For the first time, my mind wasn't preoccupied with guilt or obligation. It was present. I was present. It was strange to realize how much energy I had spent trying to hold together something that was already broken. For years, I had been pouring love into an empty cup, hoping it would somehow fill. But now that I had stopped, that same love began to pour back into me, into my home, into my child. I started saving the $700 every week that I used to send my parents. At first, it felt odd, like I was keeping something that didn't belong to me. But then Daniel suggested we use it for Emma's future. We opened a small savings account in her name, and every week I transferred that same amount, not out of guilt this time, but out of hope. It felt symbolic, like reclaiming all the energy I had wasted trying to earn love and turning it into something meaningful. One afternoon, as Emma sat coloring at the table, she looked up at me with her bright smile and said, "Mommy, you're happy today." I laughed softly and asked, "What makes you think that?" She shrugged, still coloring. "Because your eyes are shiny again." That simple sentence stopped me in my tracks. Children see what adults hide, and in that moment, I realized how much she had noticed all along. She had seen the worry, the disappointment, the sadness I tried to conceal. And now, she was seeing something new, peace. I began to invest not just money but time into things that brought me joy. I started baking again, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a local book club, met people who radiated kindness, and even took Emma to dance lessons every Saturday morning. Slowly, life became colorful again. There were moments when the old pain would resurface, like when I saw other grandparents at school events or when Emma asked innocent questions about why her grandparents never visited. Each time, I felt that familiar sting, but it didn't destroy me anymore. The hurt was still there, but it had softened. It no longer controlled me. I also began to understand something powerful about love, that it doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes, it comes from the family you build, not the one you're born into. My friends became like sisters, always checking in, showing up for birthdays, making Emma feel loved in ways my parents never did. And Daniel, he was my anchor. He never once said, "I told you so." He just held space for me to grieve and heal. His quiet presence reminded me that love isn't loud or dramatic. It's steady, patient, and kind. With time, I stopped seeing myself as the daughter who was unloved and started seeing myself as the mother who was determined to love differently. I realized that breaking the cycle wasn't just about walking away from pain, it was about building something better in its place. And every time I looked at Emma, I knew I was doing just that. I had spent so long giving love to people who didn't want it, but now I was giving it to someone who did, and that made all the difference. Months passed, and life slowly found a peaceful rhythm. There were mornings when the sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, and I'd catch myself smiling for no reason. The heaviness that once lived in my chest had softened, replaced by something lighter, acceptance. I didn't check my phone expecting a message anymore. The ache that used to come from silence had turned into gratitude for peace. But life has its way of testing your strength just when you start to feel steady again. One evening, as I was helping Emma with her homework, my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made my stomach tighten. "Dad." I stared at it for a moment, frozen. For the first time in months, I heard his voice again when I answered. It was quieter than I remembered. "Scarlett," he said, "we need to talk." He didn't sound angry, but he didn't sound sorry either. He told me that their car had broken down, that they were struggling financially, that they might need help, just for a little while. The irony wasn't lost on me. After everything, after those cruel words, after their silence, now they needed me. My heart pounded, a mixture of sadness and disbelief. For a moment, the old part of me, the one who always wanted to please, whispered, "Just help them. It's what a good daughter does." But then another voice, quieter but stronger, reminded me of all the nights I cried, all the times I begged for their love and got nothing but coldness in return. I took a deep breath and said, "I hope you're both okay." There was a pause, as if he expected me to say more. Then, in a trembling voice, he said, "Can you help us? Just this once." I looked at Emma, sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring with her tongue sticking out in concentration. She was my whole world, the reason I found strength, the reason I chose peace. And I thought of the night he told me she meant nothing to him. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "Dad," I said softly, "I wish you well, truly. But I can't go back to the way things were." There was silence on the other end, followed by a quiet, almost bitter exhale. "So that's it?" he asked. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't waver. "That's it," I whispered. "I have to protect my peace, and my child deserves better than being treated like she doesn't matter." He didn't respond. After a long pause, he muttered, "I see," and hung up. I stared at the phone, waiting for the pain to hit like it used to, but it didn't. Instead, I felt relief. Not the kind that comes from victory, but the kind that comes from finally closing a door that should have been closed long ago. Later that night, I told Daniel about the call. He nodded, proud but gentle. "You did the right thing," he said. "It's okay to let go." I sat beside him, staring into the quiet evening, and realized how far I'd come. Once, I would have done anything to earn my parents' love. Now, I understood that love should never have to be earned. It should be given freely, or not at all. I had spent so many years trying to hold on to something that was never real. But that night, I finally set it free, and in doing so, I set myself free too. A few weeks later, I watched Emma run across the park, her laughter echoing in the wind. Daniel took my hand and smiled. "She's happy," he said. I nodded. "We're happy," I replied, and for the first time, I truly believed it. The pain had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. My story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about reclaiming my worth, about realizing that love isn't proven through sacrifice, but through peace. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in gold and pink, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. Not for the pain, but for the lesson. Because I had finally learned that sometimes love means walking away. Blood makes you related, but love, real, gentle, unconditional love, makes you family. And as I watched Emma twirl under the fading light, I knew I had chosen the right kind of family all along. True love is not measured by blood or obligation. It is measured by respect, presence, and kindness. Sometimes, walking away from those who hurt you isn't selfish. It's the first step toward peace, healing, and protecting the love that truly matters.